Have you ever wondered why DEI consultants or firms are the best partners for HR departments or recruiters? Diversity, equity, and inclusion is not the responsibility of one department or of one person, but it does require leadership and advocates. Whether that leadership and advocacy comes from the DEI departments or the human resource department, there has always been a close relationship between the two. Almost all HR duties relate in some form or fashion to DEI, which is why DEI firms are the best HR partners. You might also be wondering what this has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. This illustrates what is essential and top of mind for HR professionals. My name is Rochelle Carrier, and I'm a DEI consultant and authoress of Emotional Intelligence, a toolkit for managing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for a living, I help thought provoking leaders reframe their cultural mindsets through workshops and webinars. Join us as we continue to discuss the importance of partnering up with HR. Here today with us are two trailblazers. Lauren is the co founder and CEO of Funder, a platform that automates and removes biases from seed investing by creating portfolios of AI vetted startups. Before this, Lauren co founded Black Women Talk Tech, the largest membership organization and only conference for Black women founders, and kept up an automated social listening platform. Her companies have won multiple awards, including 43 North, the Advanced Imaging Society's Distinguished Leadership Award, and the Austin I know or Eno
Mhm.
Fire Award. She has been featured in the New York Times, TechCrunch, Elle, Inc., and Fortune, and has been listed as a top entrepreneur in CIO Magazine, Essence Magazine, Entrepreneur Magazine, and the Forbes Next 1000 list. Thank you, Lauren, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Oh, I'm excited to have you. And another trailblazer, Erica. For the past 13 years, she has been working in human resources in various functions, such as benefits specialist, human resource representative, human resource consultant, a manager, and she also works in employee relations for the Auto Club Group. In her current role, Erica has led global new hire orientation projects and served as a member of the D&I Speaker Series for Midland Credit Management. Because of COVID, Erica had to completely streamline what would typically be an in-person process to a virtual environment. That meant partnering with business leaders and HR departments such as talent acquisition, IT, and benefits to work together strategically to ensure a successful transition. Erica, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with you.
Thank you. So, I'll leave this question open to the two of you. So, how do you ensure employees remain engaged and productive? Erica, how would you ensure employees remain engaged and productive, from your experience?
That is such a great question, very important question. I think one of the things in keeping employees engaged is you have to put yourself in your employee's shoes. You have to create programs, things that are beneficial. I always like to use the notion of you you want to be somewhere where people recognize you and you want to be able to be relatable. So, in terms of keeping people engaged, it's always good to survey your audience. Ask those questions that you would typically, that you may not typically ask, but those questions that need to be asked, so you can figure out, what do I need to fix? What needs to be updated? What can I do? What can I do to make a change? So definitely, surveys are great, and also engagement from and D&I perspective. I think creating infinity groups or employee resource, business resource groups are very important and very vital as well.
Right. Can you explain to the audience what employee resource groups are?
So they're typically any type of group that you. I like to think of it as being in like a fraternity or a sorority. So, in my previous employer, we created a resource group for African Americans. With this resource group, we were able to celebrate things such as Black History Month, to create different programs centered around African Americans so that we can uplift our African American employees that are there, but also educate others that may not look like us. One of the biggest things that I've found is that we're not always typically celebrated. And in different organizations, we are not always around people who look like us. So I say that as far as maybe having management and higher management level that are not, there's no representation of African Americans, but your basic workforce is overall African Americans. Those are some of the things that I was dealing with working in HR. And those were a lot of the things that I was trying to change. I always wanted to change the narrative because representation is everything.
Right. You know, in being represented by people who look like us, that means there needs to be more hiring of diversity, not only of diversity, but making them feel included. Is that something that you work hard to implement inside the workspace? And also, you know, does the decision rely on you, or is there somebody else making that decision after it comes through you?
Well, definitely working with the business and from a strategic perspective and providing them with any type of training or guidance. That was always something that I personally pushed for. Because again, being an HR business partner, I'm pretty much the middleman. So I'm like the liaison between the employees and then you have the management. And a lot of the complaints from the employees were there's not a lot of representation. Um, you know, we want to see more. We want to be given these opportunities. Why isn't there anyone of color in a management role? Why is there not an African American director or manager or team lead? So those are a lot of the questions that I was getting back from our frontline employees. And those were the questions that I was taking back to my management, business, and also when you do exit interviews, a lot of times I'm collecting those exit interviews, and those are the questions. Why are you leaving the company? What can we do to be better? And a lot of those responses were, I want to see more people that look like me. I want more opportunity for professional development and growth.
And did you receive any pushback?
There's always going to be pushback, but we found a happy medium that worked, because what was happening is that you're going to lose people. People are going to look for employment elsewhere. I think a lot of people, in the last 2 years, we always knew our worth as African Americans, and I think within the last 2-3 years of the different changes in the world, we are becoming more confident, and we're not going to sit for a lot of different things. There's definitely room at the table for all of us. So I think with keeping that mindset and just you just want to keep going, fighting for what you believe in.
Right. Lauren, I see you shaking your head.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I agree with everything that Erica's been saying. I mean, I think in terms of the larger space, we have been focusing so much on the diversity piece of DEI, but we're not necessarily talking about the other two pieces, equity, which means that we just want to be represented, right? We want a voice and we want to be taken seriously. And then the inclusion piece, which means that we see ourselves represented in the people who are leading the company or in important roles. And so I feel like oftentimes we're talking about diversity and we get pushback because it's missing the larger picture of how do you engage people, keep them in your company, keep them wanting to work for you and to grow with that business. And if you're only focusing on the numbers and the stats of pulling people in, no matter where they're coming in or what their voice sounds like in these organizations, you're never going to get to the point where people who are working there are happy and engaged and advocates for your business as well.
That's a good question. Advocacy. So, when it comes to advocacy, what is it exactly that you mean? I had this conversation a while back on another podcast. What do you mean by advocacy? And is it the same as sponsorship and mentorship for our audience?
I think that they're all very different. I would look at mentorship as generally a one-to-one a relationship where people are helping you and giving you advice around something. Sponsorship is generally where someone will go to bat for you, right? You're not in the room and they will bring your name up as someone who should be put forward for a position or leading a project. When I think about advocacy, particularly in the employee sense, I think about it from the perspective of you now going outside of the business and saying this is a great place to work and bringing in your friends to this place, or advocating and doing panels right on behalf of your company. And if you're not comfortable with that, you're not going to do that. The best way to actually bring more diversity into your business is through your employees. And I'm part of so many different groups, particularly on Facebook, where people say, I'm at this and it's a job and it's a paycheck, but I wouldn't tell you to come here. I wouldn't tell you to work here because of XYZ. And so you really want to make sure that when when your employees are not in the business, when they're not at their desks in the office, what are they saying about you? And do they feel like this is a great place that they would bring their friends into? That's what I think about in terms of advocacy.
Right. And Erica, what do you see advocacy? It's interesting because I saw advocacy as self-advocating for myself.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with Lauren. I do feel like, and agree with you as well, Rochelle, I do feel like it's self-advocacy for your own self and also for your liaison, like myself. I was an advocate not only for myself, but I was also an advocate for the employees. And in a sense, I was also an advocate for our African American population. And I think it was just something that had initially just happened. Not that it was something I was trying to do on purpose, but it was like, how can I not be? You know, they saw me in a position as an African American and also as an HR business partner. And those things that were affecting them were affecting me as well as a Black woman. So that's why I was so passionate and so proactive in pushing for those things that we need. And not only that, I wanted to take it a step further and not only make sure that we were representing other cultures that worked for the company, whether it was Indian or Mexican, Latino, you name it, you want representation. It's not just us, even though I feel like we're always at the bottom of the barrel and the last to receive, but everyone else deserved an equal playing field and representation as well. So to answer your question, yes, I was an advocate for myself and also for the group that I was representing.
And I believe that's how we probably break those delicate glass ceilings, is by self-advocating and to be able to push through those barriers to make those changes happen at a cost that's probably beneficial to us and to others and to the company's cultural mindset.
Absolutely. And I just also will add with that is that it was not easy. I mean, there were situations where conversations were being had that weren't the best conversation. And I had to get used to being comfortable with being uncomfortable, because if I'm going to perform in this role, I'm going to have to push the envelope. So if that means I may have to have a conversation with a white male counterpart, that's not, one of those easy conversations, but these are the conversations that need to be had in order to get the job done. So I found myself in these situations where they were a little bit sticky, but I had to keep pushing for it because, what's the old saying? I think my grandmother would say, a closed mouth doesn't get fed. And this was the same thing. I was pushing. We need representation. We need more people of color in higher leadership roles. What are you guys going to do about this? So yeah.
Yeah, I fully agree because I think, yes, you need to advocate for yourself. I've always said no one is going to push for you as much as you will push for you. And I think for Black women, we tend not to do that as much, right? We're not promoting ourselves as much as we should. But at the same time, it can't only be on those who are underrepresented or only on those who are oppressed to make that change. And I think that's often what happens is that you see the Black employees having to create programs for themselves to move forward, right? Or you see the diversity or DEI office that has one or two people in it and no budget that has to figure out these diversity goals and initiatives by themselves, right? And it's seen as a separate project or a side thing that doesn't benefit the whole company, but we all know it does, right? More diversity brings higher revenue and higher profits. We've seen this time and time again, and so it can't just be on the individuals or those groups to do it. It has to be a full function and a full priority of that organization.
Right. And we talk about inclusivity, and inclusive companies are more likely to hit financial goals. According to All Voices and Forbes, companies are more likely to hit their financial target goals by up to 120%. So there are very strong reasons for prioritizing DEI and partnering with HR. So Whitney, hi Whitney, thank you so much for tuning in. She says, yes, if you're new to an industry and seeing nobody that looks like you, it's very important. And Tiffany Jones, thank you for chiming in. She says, Lauren, you are completely right. So in essence, it's about pushing that envelope and being able to align people's strategies to the business objectives. So how would you align people's strategies to business objectives? How would that happen in a workspace?
I think for me, it's similar to what I was just saying in that you can't just have a DEI office and hope that they'll take care of everything, right? If you truly want to see change, that change and those goals need to lie with those at the top, just like any other goals, right? Just like your revenue goals, just like your growth goals, all of those things need to be aligned so that it's coming from the top down. I would also suggest that there are budgets given. I've talked to so many different corporations who have, like I mentioned, one or two employees in this department and literally no budget. So they're running around scrambling to try to find things and create these programs and these opportunities. So I would say that's another one. And then the third, I would say for individuals is really helping them understand why it's important. And I think this is true for any type of engagement. You don't want to just give someone an assignment and say, do it. You want to give them an assignment and attach it to the reasoning for moving the whole company forward, right? I'm not filling out this Excel sheet just to fill out this Excel sheet. I'm doing it because it puts the team on the same page and that will align and help our meet our sales goals better, right? Same with diversity. Why are we doing this? It's like you said, Rochelle, we're doing it because we need to be inclusive. We don't want to have the turnover of all of these underrepresented groups leaving all the time because they're not satisfied. Turnover is an incredibly high cost, and we know that inclusion will then lead to better returns for us and better revenue, right? So it's all about connecting the reasoning of why we're doing something to the larger goals of the business.
Right. And go ahead, Erica.
Nope, I was gonna say Lauren hit it completely on the nail, 100%. There's always the ask, and also with the ask, you put the why behind it. It does start with the top. It's because if it starts from the top, in my opinion, it shows that I care, I'm engaged, and I want to see something happen. I always use the term you are only so good as your leadership. You can't expect your people, your frontline employees, or however you want to label it, you can't put all of the work on them. It's, again, you're advocating for something, but I also need the support and the backbone of my leadership. So again, those are things that should be happening, discussed, at the top. It should be something that should be, in your goal alignment. It should be something that's discussed in performance reviews. It just goes across the whole board. So having those conversations and also creating budgets for that and pushing it, that shows the support. Make it an initiative, get everybody involved, talk about the importance of it. When you're looking at, data and everything to support the reasoning behind it. So, and again, I try to be a liaison in between the middle and just really push the envelope and really, fully support in creating and working with the business and HR as well. So it's a beautiful thing when we're able to connect and create something great.
Absolutely. I think what's really important as well, because I think since, definitely since the murder of George Floyd, there's been a recent societal spotlight on racial justice and equality. And many businesses have probably taken, a renewed interest in diversity, a renewed interest. I, I have to stress, but it's also it's successful if the employees feel safe. Employees must feel safe, respected, and connected. And right. So when you put all these moving parts together, what's really important is that, because like you said, Lauren, the turnovers are costly for corporations, and then to rehire and retrain is another cost. So in order to prevent that, we need to, and I say we as us, you and I have to be able to work in a space where we feel valued.
Yeah, and I'll say that what was really different and powerful for me during that summer after George Floyd murder was that I heard from so many of my connections and friends who are working in the corporate space that that was the first time they felt safe to express how they felt about something like that. We know that this has been happening for years, right? And I remember specifically sitting in an office after there was an unfair police shooting and having to be quiet, right? And having to feel like I had to hide my feel like I had the safe space to say anything. But when you looked at that shift where corporations were coming out and speaking out about it, that opened up the door for everyone to feel heard and everyone to actually be able to say something. And I think it was a really huge lesson in inclusion, right? In terms of how do I feel like, can I show up as my full self here? And can I actually express what I'm thinking about these larger issues? And we saw that come to life then. And I hope it continues. I think we've seen some of that die down a little bit over the last couple of years, but I truly hope that we've learned from that in terms of how to build an inclusive workplace.
Right. How do you develop diverse leaders? I do a unconscious bias workshop, and I think it really starts with us and having a little bit more emotional intelligence to see where we come from and how we have these unconscious biases as well as regular people. But how would you develop that in diverse leaders, or how would you develop diverse leaders?
I would say for me, one of the things that we partnered with was our learning and development team, because obviously at the height of all of the social injustice and again George Floyd, you saw like a pivot, and a pivot in terms of how we viewed ourselves, you know, how we had conversation. Everything just changed. And I found myself having conversations with managers, because one of the other things I have to do is coach, you know, management on whether it's disciplinary action, you name it. And I had a conversation on how I felt like they should have conversations with their employees. One of the complaints that I would always get from our Black employees were, I feel as if my white manager talks down to me, makes me feel less than. So, and it's just always those small little minute or innuendo things that you may not necessarily notice. And I know microaggression was a very big thing. And sometimes you have to have a conversation with your right counterpart and say, hey, let me just kind of pull you to the side and let's have a conversation, you know, and tell them the why behind it. Because, you know, sometimes if you don't take the time to give it a teachable moment, and the person might not know the things that they're saying, you know, could come off or be taken in a different way. So that's why we created the DNI, the speaking series group, to bring these conversations that, again, we're not comfortable. Oh, we don't want to talk about race. We don't want to touch it. It's a touchy subject. We got to have it. Because, again, if you have a company that's predominantly Black, the leadership is predominantly white, you
Right.
can't hide from this. You know,
Right.
we can't wipe this off. The things that are happening in the community, we can't shy away from that. So, again, pushing people out of their comfort zone and making them have those conversations is exactly what we need to do. Um, Unfortunately, you have some that will, you know, either they're going to walk away or they're going to continue to fight for the cause and have these conversations. So, um,
Right.
the speaker series was something that was very dear and near to me because it opened up a lot of conversation, a lot of conversation that carried over outside of the series where we would have these focus groups and have a continual conversation. You know, people cried, people were angry, but we put our cards on the table and we had those conversations and they needed to be had. So, yeah.
I'll let you go, Lauren. I have a few things that I want to say, but I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, no, I loved everything that Erica mentioned. I would also just sort of go back to what we were talking about in terms of mentors and sponsors for leadership development. I think it's so crucial to have people who have gone through this and can help bring people up, right? So I think about when I first started in the corporate space, my first corporate job was at InStyle magazine, and I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what the language was that people were speaking. I hadn't studied business. I didn't come from a family that was in the corporate world, and so while I understood conceptually what was happening and I had really great ideas, I couldn't even necessarily convey that right in a way that would be taken seriously at the time because I just didn't have the language to do it. Understanding the how to navigate the politics of a corporation or an organization and how to move forward and get promoted, all of those things you can learn through mentorship and again through sponsorship where someone's advocating for you and pushing for you. I think those are all important and not necessarily to be left up to that individual employee, but to create a true program that supports that so that you don't have someone who is trying to fight to find someone who will do this, but that it's embedded fully in the culture. I don't know if Target still does it, but they used to have a program where they had a set coffee meeting. So you had to meet with someone for coffee every single week, right? And I love that idea because it allowed you to get outside your comfort zone, learn, and then you were also, it was put on everyone, right? It wasn't just that individual who had to go out and find a mentor to bring them through the process. Everyone participated, and it really just created a great culture there. So that's an example, I think, of something you could do.
In bringing power upon this partnership between DI and HR, how would we go about doing it? Because DEI in the past and HR were parallel. They were in parallel alignments. And now, since this racial reckoning, there's a big spotlight, like I said earlier, on companies bridging the two together. So how do we power up or power upon this partnership between DEI and HR?
I would say continue to we need to continue to obviously fight for what's right. We need to continue to push for more training. We need to encourage more effective coaching. We really need to just continue to I want to keep saying the word fight, but just continuing to, to fight for what's right and just, continuing to work together. I think working with DNI and HR is a match made in heaven. There are so many great things and opportunities that come out of that. And again, by me being an advocate on the HR side of it, I can continue to push for those things, for those cultural changes. I can continue to say, hey, I agree with that. I can continue to give recommendations to leadership. So I think, just creating that push and that drive and that initiative and just, continuing to create change and partnership.
Right. And change in partnership comes with having conversations like these and having authentic conversations and the focus groups and the, the spaces where people can have these actual conversations, because it does eventually lead to burnout when those conversations are not had because you take it home with you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to be able to, address the concerns that HR might not be aware of, and like you said, to continually, push that envelope.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I just think that DI and HR go hand in hand. I don't see how they couldn't, in terms of starting from the hiring process, just making sure that they're involved in terms of removing bias from hiring, right? Or expanding how you're finding people and you're doing the recruiting and making sure you have the right pipeline of people involved, all the way through to promotions, right? And the general inclusion and creating programs, like Erica said earlier, ERG groups and all of those pieces that reflect people who are working there, and to the time when people are not happy and they're making complaints. There was a company I worked at where I felt like I was discriminated against, and so I ended up leaving. I met someone who worked in HR maybe a year or two later, and she said, "Oh yeah, we had multiple complaints, and all those people ended up leaving." Right, and so if you don't have someone who understands DEI and can take that seriously and make actual changes based on what people are saying, right? And giving not only voicing the complaints, but actually shifting the culture, then I just don't see how that works without without the two of them working very closely together.
Yeah, I was gonna say we rely so heavily on each other. We're so intertwined. It's just it's hard to separate the two.
Right. Yeah, they're closely aligned. It's like you said, I can't see them not working parallel to each other. Right. It's interesting because I think also there's HR executives have challenges, of course, that keep them up, and but they're not alone in this. And in, DEI organizations and departments are invested partners who, akin to their HR counterparts, strive to improve the company beyond just filling in the positions, executing policies and procedures. So this intersection of these two disciplines enhances company culture, performance, reputation, and turnover. So, and I believe that's a winning recipe. So, this podcast highlights lived experiences and inspirational stories of strength and tenacity. We will share profound and courageous dialogues that influence DEI by breaking the barriers and labels of stereotypes, confronting biases, and offering best practices to achieve a more significant cultural mindset. Stay tuned for more on creating a partnership between DEI and HR. Ladies, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Oh, it was a pleasure.